My DIL tried to shame me publicly, so I wished good luck and took back everything. The first time I understood I'd been erased, it was through a glowing screen. 5 words sat under a photo like a verdict. The family that really matters. In the picture, my son stood beside his wife, both smiling wide, and her mother leaned in close as if she'd always belonged there. I wasn't in the frame, not even as a shadow in the background. The living room behind them was mine, the walls I'd painted, the curtains I'd hung, the couch I'd paid for. Yet the message made it plain that I was a mistake to be edited out. I stared so long that my eyes watered, and when my hands finally moved, it wasn't with rage at first. It was with a kind of stunned disbelief, like my body was trying to protect me from what my mind refused to accept. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. I typed 2 words and sent them before I could talk myself out of it. Good luck. Nothing clever. Nothing dramatic. Just a small, cold door closing. I told myself it was nothing, that it would disappear into the endless scroll of her online life, swallowed by other people's attention. But as soon as the message left my phone, my heart began pounding as if I'd thrown a stone at a window and was waiting for the crash. A strange calm followed, the kind you feel when you've finally stopped begging for kindness and started choosing what you'll tolerate. An hour later, the crash came, but not in the way I expected. My son's voice tore through my hallway, sharp and panicked, like a siren inside the home I'd built with my own hands. He burst into the kitchen with his phone held out as if it were burning him. His face was drained of color, and his eyes looked younger than they should have, frightened and pleading. "Mom," he said, half shouting, half choking. "What did you do?" "The bank called. A lawyer called. They're saying things about the house, about the rentals, about everything." He kept scrolling through missed calls, voicemails, alerts, as if the right combination might undo what he was seeing. I watched him and felt something inside me settle into place. Not joy. Not cruelty. Something steadier. Certainty. To explain how we reached that moment, I have to go back to the beginning. Back to the version of me who believed love could soften anything. My name in this telling is Maren Hale, and I was 63 when the photo appeared, though I felt older than that in the months leading up to it. I'd spent my whole life working as if rest were a luxury for other people. When I was 16, I was pregnant, alone, and terrified. The boy who promised forever vanished the moment forever started asking for responsibility. I didn't have a safety net or a family fortune, just a stubborn spine and the kind of pride that refuses to lie down. I made my first money standing on a street corner with a folding table and a cardboard sign, selling pies I'd baked in a borrowed oven. I learned fast. People will buy warmth when their lives feel cold, and a pie is more than dessert when it carries the scent of comfort. Every dollar became flour, every profit became a better pan, and every week I added a little more. I took small jobs where I could, cleaning offices after hours, balancing receipts for a tiny shop, learning numbers the way some people learn music. If I couldn't afford college, I'd build my own education through work and stubbornness. My son, Rowan, grew up watching me stretch money like dough and time like thread. I stitched his school clothes when the seams split. I made birthdays feel magical with cheap streamers and homemade cake. I taught him manners because I wanted him to move through the world without shame, and I taught him grit because I knew the world would not be gentle. When he was 8, the man who'd sometimes floated in and out of our life disappeared for good. I told Rowan the truth in the simplest way I could. Some people run when life gets heavy. We don't. We hold what we love and carry it forward. By the time Rowan was grown, I'd built what I thought was a modest legacy. A small accounting firm job turned into steady income, and my early investments, tiny, careful, planned, became 3 rental properties over the years. Nothing glamorous, but solid. Roofs over tenants' heads, and safety under my own feet. I had a savings account that represented thousands of ordinary sacrifices. Cheap shoes, skipped vacations, nights spent calculating instead of sleeping. I wasn't rich in the way people picture wealth, but I was secure, and after a lifetime of insecurity, that felt like a miracle. The day Rowan brought home the woman who would become his wife, the house smelled like beef stew and bay leaves. and I remember thinking the scent was a blessing. It was a Sunday in early spring, rain tapping softly against the windows, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside and be kind to each other. I heard the sound of heels before I saw her, sharp clicks across my hardwood floor like punctuation marks. Each step seemed to announce not a person but a statement. I have arrived, and I expect to be noticed. She introduced herself as Celeste, and she wore a dress that clung to her like it had been tailored to win arguments. Her smile was bright but too controlled, as if it had been practiced in a mirror. When she shook my hand, her fingers were cold, and her grip lasted a half-second too long, not friendly, measuring. Her eyes traveled over my clothes and my kitchen the way people look at an apartment they might rent if the price is right. "So you're the mother," she said, and there was a pause where "nice to meet you" should have lived. The words never arrived. She said, "the mother," like a label on a box. Rowan didn't notice. He was in love, and love can make even sharp things look like jewelry. He stood close to her, a little too eager to prove he was grown, and when she spoke, his face softened as if every syllable was a gift. I told myself to be generous. First meetings are awkward. People get nervous. Maybe she didn't know what to say. But my instincts, honed by poverty and disappointment, kept whispering that this wasn't nerves. This was ownership. At dinner, she turned my table into a stage where I was meant to play the role of background scenery. She commented on my decor with a tone that sounded like praise but carried a faint sting. "What a unique style," she said, eyes lingering on the family photos. Her gaze paused on the framed certificate from the night class I'd taken years ago, the one piece of paper that proved I'd clawed my way into stability. "You're very resourceful," she added, as if it were a compliment you'd give to someone who survived a shipwreck. She tasted the stew and pushed her bowl a few inches away. "It's bold," she said, blinking slowly. "I'm used to lighter flavors." Then she smiled at Rowan, bright and sweet, like the two of them shared a joke I wasn't invited to. I heard her whisper later when she thought I couldn't, "Does she always cook so, homey?" The word landed like a pebble thrown at glass. Not enough to break it, but enough to make a crack that would spread. Celeste's mother, Marjorie, was a presence even when she wasn't in the room. Celeste spoke of her constantly. Her salon chain, her connections, the trips they took, the restaurants they loved. It wasn't conversation so much as a reminder of hierarchy. I learned quickly that in Celeste's mind, there were two kinds of people. Those who belonged to her world and those who served it. I was not meant to belong. After they left that first night, I stood at my sink with my hands in warm dishwater and stared out the window at the rain. The house felt quieter than it should have, as if the walls themselves were listening, worried. I sat in the chair where I'd once sewn Rowan's uniforms, where I'd counted pennies and prayed rent would wait one more day. Tears came before I could stop them. Not because a rude guest had insulted my stew, but because I recognized something familiar, the look of someone deciding you are beneath them. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I had spent my life learning that survival sometimes means silence. Rowan loved her. I didn't want to be the villain in his story. I told myself that if I stayed steady and polite, she'd soften. That time would teach her respect. I didn't yet understand that people like Celeste don't soften. They sharpen. The months that followed weren't one big dramatic event. They were smaller, crueler. Death by 1,000 neat little cuts. Every visit carried a remark wrapped in sugar. If my hands were dry from cleaning, she'd mention good lotions, as if I were a neglected project. If I wore my hair the same way I always had, she'd tilt her head and suggest a fresh look for women at this stage. Her voice would be sweet, almost affectionate, and that sweetness made it harder for Rowan to recognize the poison. If I flinched, she'd smile wider, as if my discomfort proved her power. When Rowan announced their engagement, he arrived glowing, holding a bottle of cheap champagne like it was the finest thing in the world. He hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt my son again. The boy who used to run into my arms after school, who believed I could fix anything. "I wanted you to be the first to know," he said. His happiness was real, and it broke my heart because I didn't want to dim it. I congratulated him, kissed his cheek, and swallowed the unease the way I'd swallowed hardship my whole life. Celeste began coming over alone after that, pretending it was for wedding planning, for bonding. In truth, those visits were lessons in control. She'd sit in my living room as if she owned the air, her legs crossed, her phone face down on my coffee table like a claim. "We need to talk about boundaries," she said one afternoon, stirring tea with a small spoon that clinked against my best china. "Rowan and I are building a life. There can't be interference." She said, interference, the way you might talk about a pest problem. I told her calmly that I respected my son's privacy, that I had my own life, my own routines. I wasn't hovering. I wasn't begging for a role. She smiled in that practiced way and leaned forward slightly. "It's not personal," she said. "Men can be attached. Sometimes mothers don't know when to step back." The word mothers came out like a warning. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my voice steady. I wasn't going to hand her the satisfaction of watching me break. Wedding planning became another arena where I was meant to be invisible. Celeste and Marjorie treated decisions like private property. At dress shopping, they placed me in a chair near the corner, as if I was someone's ride waiting outside. Marjorie laughed with salespeople, held fabric to her daughter's waist, and spoke about traditions, with a smile that made it clear I wasn't included. When Rowan tried to involve me, Celeste would act surprised. "Oh, I didn't know you invited her," as if my presence were an inconvenience that needed to be managed. On the wedding day, I did whatever I was asked. I fetched water. I directed guests. I fixed tiny problems. Each time the photographer moved toward my side of the room, Celeste found a task to send me away. "Could you check on the seating cards? Could you help in the kitchen?" Her smile never slipped. In the pictures afterward, I appeared like an afterthought, cropped at the edge, blurred in the background, present but not allowed to matter. I told myself it would change after the wedding. People settle down after the big event, I thought. Reality will soften her. But marriage didn't soften Celeste. It armed her. They moved into an apartment that Rowan couldn't afford alone. He came to me with the familiar look of apology and hope, explaining that his salary wasn't enough for a down payment, that he needed a small loan to get started. I gave it to him because he was my only child and I believed love meant helping. I didn't see that I was handing him not just money, but a rope someone else would later pull tight. When I visited their place, Celeste treated me like a hazard near expensive furniture. "Careful with that," she'd say, eyes flicking to my hands as if I might stain something by existing. At dinners, she steered conversations into topics designed to exclude me. Exclusive restaurants, films I'd never heard of, trips they planned with her mother. If I tried to join in, she'd give a sympathetic smile. "Oh, you probably wouldn't know that place," she'd say softly, like she was sparing me embarrassment. Rowan would laugh awkwardly and change the subject, and each time he did, something inside me grew colder. Then came the request that changed everything. Rowan showed up one evening with papers in his hand and a nervous energy in his shoulders. He talked too fast, as if he'd rehearsed. "Mom, Celeste and I have been thinking about the future," he said. "You're getting older, and we want to make things easier if anything happens. What if you put the properties in my name? Just for security. It's simpler. No legal problems." The words were his, but the rhythm was hers. I heard her voice inside his sentences like a ventriloquist hidden behind a curtain. I should have said no. I should have laughed him out of my kitchen. I should have told him that security doesn't require surrender. But motherhood, for me, had always been sacrifice, and I'd trained myself so well that I could mistake a demand for a duty. I signed. I told myself my son would never hurt me. I told myself he was still the boy who cried when I scraped my knee. I didn't realize that love, when used against you, can become a weapon sharper than hate. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark listening to the house settle, the creaks and sighs of old wood, and I felt as if I'd stepped onto thin ice without noticing. In the weeks after, Celeste's confidence grew bolder. She spoke more openly about how things would be now that Rowan was in charge. She began implying that my place in my own home was temporary, that older women should downsize, that peace and quiet were important for the next phase of life. Each suggestion sounded polite, but the meaning underneath was brutal. Move aside. What finally woke me fully wasn't one insult. It was the pattern, the way she smiled while she pressed, the way Rowan avoided my eyes, the way my own kindness was being turned into an exit strategy. I began to understand that if I didn't protect myself, no one would. I contacted a lawyer quietly, not as a dramatic act, but as a woman finally treating her life with the seriousness it deserved. I brought him copies of what I'd signed, every email, every message, every vague promise of repayment. He read in silence, then looked up with a face that told me the truth before he spoke. I wasn't just dealing with a difficult daughter-in-law. I was dealing with a plan. He told me to document everything. Dates. Conversations. The pressure. The way I'd been guided into signing. I started writing it down like a ledger, because numbers and facts were the language I trusted when emotions could be twisted. I paid attention to how Celeste spoke when Rowan wasn't there, to the careless pride that surfaced when she thought she'd already won. I began collecting details the way I once collected dollars. Slowly, carefully, with patience that looks calm but is really preparation. And then the photo appeared, bright and smug on a Friday afternoon, and those 5 words finally gave me what my lawyer called a trigger. Something undeniable, public, clear enough that no one could pretend it was a misunderstanding. The family that really matters. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a declaration of intent. And when I replied, "Good luck," I wasn't wishing her well. I was acknowledging what she didn't yet know. She was about to learn that I had survived worse than her, and I had learned to fight with something sharper than anger. Proof. After I sent those 2 words, I kept my face calm the way I'd learned to do when life tried to knock me down. But inside, my thoughts ran like a storm. I washed dishes I hadn't dirted, wiped counters that were already clean, and listened to the house as if it might whisper what would happen next. Celeste stayed in the living room with her mother and a couple of friends, laughing loudly, swiping through comments, feeding on attention the way some people feed on sugar. Every so often her eyes flicked toward the kitchen, checking whether I looked hurt. I didn't give her the pleasure. I moved steadily, quietly, like a woman putting away tools before a long job. When Rowan's phone started ringing, it didn't ring once and stop. It rang in waves, one call blending into the next, each one tightening his voice until it cracked. I could hear him trying to sound confident, trying to be the adult husband Celeste expected him to be, but the panic kept leaking out. At first, he stepped into the hallway, turning his back on Celeste as if shielding her from stress. By the second call, he was pacing in front of the window. By the third, he was staring at the floor like the floor might offer answers. Celeste's laughter faltered. Her friends leaned in, curious at first, then uneasy. When Rowan said the word frozen, Celeste's smile froze too. She sat up straighter, her hand tightening around her phone. She tried to catch his eye, but he didn't look at her. He was listening to something he didn't understand and didn't like. Then he stormed into the kitchen, and the house shifted. His voice was loud enough to shake the air. He demanded explanations, demanded I fix what I'd done, as if I'd pressed a button out of spite. Celeste followed him, her mother right behind, both of them wearing outrage like armor. I didn't react the way Rowan expected. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I looked at him the way I had when he was a boy and had lied about breaking something, the way you look when you're not angry anymore, just done with excuses. "Sit," I told him, and my voice was quieter than his, but it held more weight. Rowan hesitated, confused by my calm. Celeste's mouth opened, ready to interrupt, but I lifted my hand. She stopped, not because she respected me, but because she sensed something was different now. The power in the room was no longer hers. I walked to my bedroom and returned with a thick folder, the kind you'd use for taxes or property records. It looked ordinary. That was the point. Ordinary things are what change lives when they're handled correctly. I placed it on the coffee table in front of Rowan and flipped it open. At the top was a timeline I'd typed and printed. Dates, incidents, names. Underneath were screenshots, copies of documents, and notes in my handwriting. I saw Rowan's eyes widen as he realized I hadn't just been silently suffering. I'd been watching. I'd been recording. I'd been preparing. Celeste's expression tightened. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. Rowan reached for the first page like it might bite him. I watched him read, and I watched his face change as words sank in. He tried to glance up at Celeste, but his eyes kept returning to the page, drawn there by the cold clarity of what I'd collected. I saw his mind scrambling to protect the story he'd been living in, that his wife loved him, that his mother was overreacting, that family problems were just misunderstandings that could be smoothed over with time. I didn't let him hide in that story. I slid another sheet toward him, a printed transcript of a conversation Celeste had never expected anyone to hear. I'd kept my evidence as clean and organized as a ledger because messy proof gives liars room to breathe. Neat proof suffocates them. Rowan's lips moved as he read silently. Then he looked up, and his voice came out small. This is her?" he asked, as if the words belonged to a stranger. Celeste took a step forward. "What is this?" she snapped, her voice too sharp, too quick. "Where did you get this?" "From your carelessness," I thought. "From your arrogance. From the way you assumed you were untouchable." But I didn't say that. I kept my words simple. "From listening," I said. "From paying attention. From documenting what you didn't bother to hide." Celeste's mother made a dismissive sound, the kind rich women use to wave away consequences. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're trying to twist things. You're upset because you're not the center of your son's life anymore." Rowan's eyes flicked toward her, startled, then back to me. He still didn't know where to place his loyalty. He was trapped between the woman who fed him love and the woman who fed him illusion. I took out my phone and placed it on the table. "You want to hear it?" I asked Rowan. "Not just read it. Hear it." His throat bobbed. "Mom," he started, like he was begging me not to. Not because he thought I was wrong, but because he feared what truth would cost him. Celeste's face sharpened into anger. "You're invading my privacy," she said. "This is illegal." "Nothing illegal," I replied. "I'm careful. That's the difference between you and me. I do things properly." I pressed play. Celeste's voice filled the room, bright and casual, the way she sounded when she thought she was safe. She was speaking to someone, laughing, bragging, calling me names that burned even after months of practice. She spoke about getting rid of the old woman, about how a baby would be the perfect excuse to push me out, about how she'd already convinced Rowan I was toxic and controlling. It wasn't a confession said in anger. It was a strategy said with pride. Rowan's face strained. His fingers tightened into fists, then loosened, then tightened again. The man who'd raised his voice at me an hour earlier now looked like he could barely breathe. Celeste lunged for the phone, but I snapped it back before she could touch it. Her mask cracked. Her eyes flashed, and for a moment the sweetness dropped completely. "This is insane," she hissed. "You're obsessed. You've always been obsessed with him." Rowan turned toward her slowly, as if seeing her for the first time. "Celeste," he said, and his voice broke on her name. Did you say that?" She pivoted instantly, switching tactics. Tears welled in her eyes as if summoned on command. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's not what I meant. She's manipulating you. She's always wanted us apart." Her mother stepped closer, offering backup like a trained partner. "Honey," she said to Rowan, voice soft. "You know how your mom gets. She's been alone a long time. She takes things personally." Rowan looked between them, lost, and for a split second I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who wanted everyone happy, who feared conflict like a storm. Celeste had built her power on that fear. I opened the folder again and pulled out something different. Bank printouts, loan notices, and property documents. Facts. Numbers. Paper that didn't care about tears. I didn't start this, I said quietly. I'm ending it. Rowan stared at the documents, then at me. What is all this? He whispered. It's what she did after you convinced me to sign, I replied. The properties weren't just transferred. They were used. Celeste's mother stiffened. Celeste's eyes widened a fraction, then narrowed with calculation. Rowan flipped through the pages, scanning headings, amounts, dates. His breathing turned shallow. These loans, he said slowly. These are in my name? They're tied to the properties, I said. And yes, they point back to you. That's why the bank called you. Because on paper, you're the owner. And owners are responsible. Celeste's mouth opened, then closed. Her tears vanished. The performance ended when it stopped working. Rowan's voice rose. Celeste, what is this? Why are there loans against my mom's properties? Against the house. Celeste's eyes flicked to her mother, quick as a signal. Marjorie stepped in immediately. This is a misunderstanding, she said. A paperwork issue. These things happen. Financial systems can be messy. Rowan stared at her. Messy, he repeated. This is tens of thousands of dollars. Celeste finally spoke, and her tone shifted, still controlled, but colder. We needed liquidity, she said. For investments. For our future. You said you wanted stability. Rowan looked stunned. We, he said. You did this without telling me? Celeste rolled her eyes just slightly, the smallest slip of contempt. If I told you everything, you'd panic, she said. And look, here you are panicking. The air in the room changed again. Rowan's anger surged, but it was tangled with shame, because he realized he'd been treated like a child in his own marriage. I sat back in my chair. I wasn't enjoying his pain, but I wasn't going to cushion him from it either. His pain was part of waking up. Rowan looked at me with something like betrayal. Mom, he said, why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? I met his eyes. I tried, I said. Every time she humiliated me and you looked away. Every time she pushed me aside and you told me I was being sensitive. You didn't want to hear it because hearing it would mean admitting you'd chosen wrong. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. It's honest, I replied. Celeste snapped. Oh please. You've been waiting for this. You've been plotting. You want to break us up because you can't handle him loving someone else. Rowan flinched at the accusation, because deep down he'd always feared it might be true. She'd planted that fear like a seed and watered it every time I sighed or looked tired. I leaned forward. If I wanted to break you up, I said, I wouldn't have waited until you'd already signed away my life. I would have done it years ago. This isn't about jealousy. It's about survival. Celeste laughed, sharp and humorless. Survival, she repeated, like the word amused her. I opened the folder one more time and pulled out the piece that mattered most, a transcript of a call Celeste had taken in my living room when she thought I was asleep. She'd spoken to someone older, an aunt, a grandmother, some relative, bragging with the kind of careless cruelty only the confident possess. She'd spoken about Rowan as if he were a tool. About me as if I were already gone. About divorce as if it were simply a step in her plan. Rowan's eyes skimmed the page, then stopped. His mouth parted slightly. Divorce, he whispered. Celeste's face went still. Read it, I said to Rowan. Out loud. If you can. He tried. His voice cracked on the second sentence. He stopped, swallowing hard. Celeste's mother surged forward. This is fabricated, she snapped, losing her softness. This is slander. I held up my phone. It's recorded, I said. There's more than paper. Rowan's hands shook as he pushed the transcript away like it burned him. He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the street, shoulders trembling. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Celeste was quiet, as if weighing whether to keep lying or switch strategies. Then Rowan turned. His face wasn't just angry. It was shattered. "Celeste," he said, "tell me the truth. Just once." Celeste's eyes glinted. She looked at him, then at me, then at the folder, and something hardened in her expression. She realized she wasn't going to cry her way out of this. So she did what bullies do when they're cornered. She attacked. "Yes," she said, voice rising. "Fine. I said things. I was venting. You want the truth? Your mother has been a problem from the start. Always hovering. Always playing the martyr. Always acting like you owe her your life because she struggled." Rowan recoiled as if struck. Celeste stepped closer, fueled by her own anger now. "You needed a wife," she spat. "Not a second mother. I tried to build a future and she kept dragging you back into her little world of sacrifice and guilt." My heart beat steadily. Her insults didn't sting the same anymore. They were proof. Rowan's voice went low. "You used me," he said. Celeste scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic." "You used me," he repeated louder. "And you used my mother." Marjorie grabbed Celeste's arm, hissing something under her breath, but Celeste yanked free. "You're all acting like I'm some villain," she snapped. "I deserve better than this house, this neighborhood, this ordinary life. I married you because you promised more." Rowan stared at her as if she'd turned into someone else in front of him. "I never promised you my mother's properties," he said. Celeste's eyes flashed. "You promised me a life," she said. "And you couldn't deliver it without her." The room went quiet again, heavy with the weight of what had been said aloud. Rowan looked at me, and I saw something shift inside him. Not comfort, not forgiveness, but recognition. He recognized that I hadn't been exaggerating. That the small humiliations weren't accidents. They were tactics. He recognized that his silence had been permission. His voice shook when he spoke. "Mom," he whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't soften. Not yet." "You didn't want to know," I replied. Celeste's phone buzzed again, and she glanced down at it. Her eyes widened slightly. Rowan saw the change and reached for his own phone, checking notifications, missed calls, emails. The legal process I'd set in motion didn't depend on shouting matches or emotions. It depended on systems doing what systems do when paperwork is challenged and fraud is suspected. Rowan looked up, panic returning. "Mom, what's happening? Why are the accounts frozen? Why is there a lawsuit?" I exhaled slowly. This was the part where I could have enjoyed his fear. But enjoying it would make me like Celeste, and I refused to become her. "I challenged the transfers," I said. "Legally. Properly. The contracts had irregularities. I signed under pressure. And the properties were used in ways I never agreed to. A court order froze anything tied to them until it's resolved." Celeste's face went pale. "You can't do that," she whispered. "I already did," I replied. Rowan's hands went to his hair, gripping. But why didn't you just talk to me?" he pleaded. I looked at him and finally let my own hurt show in my voice. "I did talk," I said. "For years. You just didn't listen." Marjorie burst out. "This is cruelty. You're ruining their marriage." I turned toward her. "Your daughter ruined their marriage," I said calmly. "I'm just refusing to let her ruin my life too." Celeste's eyes darted around the room, calculating exits, angles, threats. "I'll sue you," she said suddenly, voice trembling with fury. "For harassment. For defamation. For telling the truth?" I asked. Rowan flinched again, as if each new threat pushed him further from her. He stared at his wife, and I watched the last threads of his illusion fray. The doorbell rang. Celeste froze. Marjorie stiffened. Rowan looked startled, then wary, as if he sensed what was coming. When I opened the door, my lawyer stood there with a calm, professional expression, a folder in his hand. Beside him was a police officer, neutral and quiet. They're not for drama, but for procedure. Rowan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My lawyer stepped inside. "Ms. Hale," he said, nodding to me, then turning to Rowan with polite firmness. "Mr. Hale, I'm here to provide formal notice regarding the property dispute and the immediate protective orders concerning the assets." Celeste's breath came fast. "This is insane," she whispered, but her voice lacked confidence now. The officer spoke, steady and practiced. "Ma'am," he said, looking at Celeste, "there is an order requiring you to vacate the premises within a set time frame while the ownership issue is resolved. This property is currently recognized as belonging to Ms. Hale pending the court's decision." Celeste stared at him like she couldn't understand the words. Then she turned to Rowan, eyes blazing. "You're going to let them do this?" she demanded. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He looked at me, then at the evidence, then at his wife, and I saw him standing at the edge of the hardest lesson of his life. The moment you realize love doesn't excuse betrayal. His voice, when it finally came, was rough. "Celeste," he said, "I need you to leave." The words hit her like a slap. "Leave?" she screamed. "This is my home too." Rowan's face tightened with something like grief and fury tangled together. "It was never yours," he said quietly. "Not the way you wanted it to be." Celeste stood shaking, not from sadness but from the shock of losing control. Then she spun and stormed upstairs, dragging rage behind her like a train. A moment later, the house filled with the sound of drawers being yanked open, hangers clattering, suitcases thumping, the frantic violence of someone destroying what they couldn't own. I sat back down as if my legs had suddenly remembered their age. My lawyer spoke softly to me, confirming documents, timelines, and next steps. The officer stood by the entryway, watchful but not aggressive. Rowan remained in the middle of the room like a man who'd been dropped into a different life without warning. When Celeste came back down, her appearance had changed. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were red. Her dress was wrinkled. The polished princess had cracked, revealing something frantic underneath. She stopped at the doorway, turned, and tried one last time to regain the stage. "This isn't over," she said, voice shaking with hatred. "You'll regret this." I met her stare. "Maybe," I said. "But not as much as you'll regret underestimating me." She left, her mother close behind, and the door shut with a finality that felt like air rushing back into a room that had been sealed too long. Rowan didn't move for several seconds. Then he sank onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. A sound escaped him that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. Just a broken exhale of a man realizing what he'd allowed. I didn't rush to comfort him. Not because I didn't love him, but because love without accountability is what had brought us here. After a long silence, he looked up at me, eyes raw. "Mom," he whispered, "what happens now?" I stared at the folder on the table, then at the quiet house around us. My house, my life returning inch by inch. "Now," I said, "we clean up what she tried to destroy. And you decide what kind of man you want to be when the dust settles." Outside, the street looked ordinary. Cars passing, a dog barking, the world continuing without caring about the war that had just shifted inside my living room. But inside, something had changed permanently. The woman who'd spent years swallowing humiliation had finally stopped swallowing. And the next phase was going to be harder than anyone in that room understood. The house felt too quiet after the door closed behind Celeste and her mother. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the hollow sort that follows an explosion, when your ears are ringing and your body is trying to decide whether the danger has truly passed. Rowan stayed on the couch, hunched forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it held answers he'd missed for years. I watched him from my chair, not moving, not speaking, letting the silence do the work words couldn't. Eventually, the lawyer finished explaining the immediate steps and left, followed by the officer. Their departure was polite, efficient, almost anticlimactic, which somehow made the situation feel more real. No dramatic speeches. No slammed doors. Just paperwork, procedure, and the quiet authority of consequences. When the door shut behind them, Rowan flinched, as if the finality hit him all at once. "I ruined everything," he said at last, his voice hoarse. "I didn't rush to deny it." "You damaged things," I replied. "There's a difference." He laughed bitterly. "That's generous." I folded my hands in my lap, the same hands that had kneaded dough, balanced ledgers, and signed papers I'd trusted too much. "What matters now," I said, "is whether you learn from it or drown in it." Rowan dragged his hands down his face. "I don't even know who I am without her," he admitted. That confession hurt more than his earlier shouting ever had. Not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how thoroughly Celeste had hollowed him out. I'd watched her shrink him over the years, subtly, efficiently, mocking his hesitations, dismissing his instincts, training him to doubt himself while calling it encouragement. "You were someone before her," I said quietly. "You just forgot." The next few days passed in a strange blur. Rowan stayed in the house, sleeping in his old room like a man who'd time-traveled backward without permission. I could hear him pacing at night, replaying conversations, regrets knocking louder than sleep. During the day, I returned to my routines deliberately, reclaiming them one by one. I cooked meals I liked. I sat in my favorite chair without bracing for comments. I walked through my own rooms without feeling like a guest. But peace didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, wary, testing whether it was truly welcome. Rowan tried to help in awkward ways, washing dishes too aggressively, offering to fix things that weren't broken, apologizing in bursts whenever guilt overflowed. Each apology sounded sincere, but I could tell he wanted absolution as much as forgiveness. I wasn't ready to give either easily. "Mom," he said one afternoon as we sat at the kitchen table, "why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you fight harder when I brought those papers?" I met his eyes. "Because I trusted you," I said. "And because I didn't want to believe you'd ever put me in danger." His shoulders sagged. "I didn't think." "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't listen." That truth hung between us, heavy but necessary. Outside our house, the fallout was spreading. Celeste didn't disappear quietly. She never had. Within days, I became aware of posts circulating online, carefully framed photos from happier times, captions about betrayal, about toxic parents, about how some women couldn't let go of their sons. She painted herself as wounded, wronged, misunderstood. Anyone who didn't know the full story might have believed her. I watched from a distance, not responding, not engaging. Silence can be powerful when the truth is solid enough to stand without defense. But others spoke. Neighbors who'd watched Celeste bark orders at me while smiling for Rowan. Friends who'd seen me sent to the kitchen while she entertained guests in my living room. People who knew my history, my work, my sacrifices. They commented, gently at first, then firmly, then with unmistakable clarity. "That woman didn't treat her husband's mother like family," one wrote. "I saw how she spoke to Marin like she was staff," another added. "You don't get to play victim after trying to steal someone's life," said a third. The tide turned faster than Celeste expected. She disabled comments, then deleted posts, then reappeared with vague messages about healing and moving forward. Each shift made her look less wronged and more exposed. Rowan watched it all with a mix of shame and disbelief. "I defended her," he said one night, voice thick. "I told people you were exaggerating. I told you to be patient." I didn't scold him. He was doing that well enough himself. "You believed what you needed to believe to keep your world intact," I said. "That's human. It's also dangerous." The legal process moved steadily in the background, indifferent to emotions. The contracts were examined. The timelines analyzed. The loans traced. My lawyer updated me regularly, his tone calm, confident. Each update felt like another brick set back into the foundation of my life. Celeste responded with threats at first, emails full of legal jargon, demands, accusations. When those didn't scare me into backing down, she tried a different approach. Her mother came alone one afternoon, standing stiffly on my porch like she was stepping onto enemy territory. I hesitated before opening the door, then decided I wasn't afraid anymore. She looked smaller without her entourage, her confidence dulled by fear she couldn't hide. "We need to talk," she said. I let her in but didn't offer tea. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded too neatly. "This has gone too far," she began. "Celeste made mistakes, but destroying her marriage and reputation." I held up my hand. "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "Your daughter did." She sighed, frustration leaking through. "You have to understand, she comes from a different background. Different expectations." I leaned forward. "Respect isn't cultural," I said. "It's basic." Her mouth tightened. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "Money. An apology. We can make this go away." I studied her face. The calculation, the desperation hidden beneath practiced poise. "I want distance," I said. "Permanent distance. I want her lawsuit dropped. I want no contact. And I want my son to be left alone." She scoffed weakly. "You're being vindictive." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm being careful." She left without another word, her heels quieter than the first time I'd heard them, and I knew then that Celeste's world was shrinking. The lawsuit arrived anyway, thick and formal, accusing me of emotional manipulation, undue influence, and malicious intent. Rowan watched me read it, panic flaring again. "What if she wins?" he asked. "What if she takes something?" I folded the letter and placed it on the table. "Then we fight," I said. "With facts." And we did. Over weeks, evidence stacked up like a wall she couldn't climb. Messages she'd written, recordings she'd forgotten about, financial trails she'd assumed no one would follow. Each piece stripped another layer from the story she'd tried to sell. During this time, Rowan began changing in small but noticeable ways. He stopped flinching when I expressed an opinion. He listened instead of deflecting. He took responsibility for chores without being asked, not as penance, but as participation. One evening, I found him repairing a loose hinge on the back door, something I'd mentioned once in passing months earlier. "I should have done this years ago," he muttered. "Do it now," I said. "That's enough." Trust didn't return overnight. It rebuilt slowly, like muscle after injury. Aching, tentative, but growing stronger with use. We talked more honestly than we ever had. About his father. About loneliness. About why he'd been so susceptible to someone who promised certainty. "I was tired of feeling small," he admitted one night. "She made me feel chosen. Important." I nodded. "That's how manipulators work," I said. "They don't overpower you. They replace your sense of self with theirs." Months passed. The court date arrived like a quiet storm, less dramatic than Celeste had imagined. Her arguments unraveled under scrutiny. Her claims collapsed under documentation. The judge didn't raise their voice or scold. They simply ruled. The contracts were voided. The assets were restored. The loans were flagged as fraudulent. Fees assigned. Celeste lost. When the final decision came through, Rowan read it twice, then looked up at me in disbelief. "It's over," he said softly. "Yes," I replied. "It is." He exhaled shakily, then surprised me by laughing, a short broken laugh that sounded like relief fighting grief. "I don't know how you did it," he said. I met his eyes. "I survived long enough to learn how," I said. The weeks after the ruling were quieter than I expected. No celebrations. No victory speeches. Just a gradual settling into a life that felt, finally, like mine again. Rowan filed for divorce. Celeste didn't fight it. She couldn't. There was nothing left to leverage. Occasionally, I heard updates through others. She'd moved cities, changed jobs, tried to start fresh. Her name carried weight now, but not the kind she liked. Reputation is harder to outrun than debt. One afternoon, long after the dust had settled, Rowan sat with me in the garden. We were planting new flowers where Celeste had once insisted on exotic ones that never thrived. "I'm sorry," he said again, but this time without urgency or desperation. "Just the truth." I nodded. "I know," I said. And for the first time, I meant it. The house felt different then, not just quieter, but lighter. As if it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. I stood in my kitchen, breathing in the scent of familiar food, and understood something I hadn't before. I hadn't just defended my property. I defended my worth. And that realization would carry me into the final chapter of this story. One not built on revenge, but on rebuilding what nearly disappeared. After the ruling, life didn't snap back into happiness the way people imagine justice should. There were no fireworks, no sudden rush of joy. Instead, there was space. Wide, unfamiliar space where conflict used to live. I had to learn how to exist inside it. Rowan stayed with me while the divorce moved through its final stages. The paperwork was clean, almost sterile compared to the emotional wreckage it represented. Celeste didn't contest much anymore. Whatever fire had driven her before seemed to have burned itself out under scrutiny and exposure. She signed where required, avoided confrontation, and disappeared into silence. Rowan, however, didn't disappear. He lingered, unsure how to rebuild himself without the framework he'd relied on for years. Some mornings he woke early and paced the house, as if afraid stillness would swallow him. Other days he slept too long, exhaustion pulling him under like a tide. One evening, he finally said what I'd been waiting to hear, not an apology, but a question. "How did you survive all those years alone?" he asked, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "Not just financially. Emotionally." I looked at him for a long moment. No one had ever asked me that before. Not friends, not co-workers, not even him. Survival had always been treated as a given, like breathing. "I didn't think of it as survival," I said slowly. "I thought of it as responsibility. You were there. You needed me. So I kept going." "That's it?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "No. That's not all of it. I also learned to accept loneliness without letting it make me cruel. That part was harder." He absorbed that in silence. In the weeks that followed, Rowan began therapy at my insistence. At first, he resisted, claimed he didn't need it, that he could handle things. I didn't argue. I simply told him handling wasn't the same as healing. Eventually, he went. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were real. He started recognizing patterns, how Celeste had isolated him, how she'd reframed my concern as control, how she'd rewarded his compliance and punished his independence. Seeing it laid out by someone neutral shook him deeply. "I thought love was supposed to feel intense all the time," he admitted one night. "Like pressure meant passion." "Pressure means imbalance," I said. "Love should feel steady." As Rowan worked through his reckoning, I faced my own quieter aftermath. I'd spent so long being vigilant that I didn't know how to lower my guard. Even in peace, my body stayed tense, waiting for the next insult, the next demand. I caught myself listening too closely to footsteps, rereading messages for hidden meanings, bracing for conflict that never came. One afternoon, while reorganizing a drawer in the living room, I found an old notebook. Inside were lists from decades earlier, expenses, goals, reminders to myself written in a younger hand. At the back was a page I'd forgotten entirely. "Things I want someday," it read. The list was short. "A garden that feels like home. Time to read without guilt. A life where I don't have to explain my worth." I sat on the floor and cried, not from pain, but from the shock of realizing how long I'd postponed wanting. Slowly, deliberately, I began to claim those wants. I replanted the garden exactly how I liked it. Native flowers, sturdy and honest. I rearranged the living room, putting back pieces Celeste had deemed outdated. Each choice felt like reclaiming a sentence in my own story. Rowan noticed. "The house feels warmer," he said one evening. "That's because it's allowed to be itself again," I replied. News about Celeste filtered in sporadically. She'd moved states, changed industries, tried to rebuild her image. But the world is smaller than it used to be, and stories have a way of following people who leave damage behind. She wasn't thriving, but I didn't take pleasure in that. I felt something quieter, closure. One day, months later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Her name on the envelope. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the counter, heavy with the past. When I finally did, I read it carefully. She apologized, truly it seemed, but each apology was tangled with explanation. Her upbringing, her ambitions, her fear of being ordinary. She acknowledged harm, but she still framed it as circumstance rather than choice. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Rowan read it later and looked up at me. "Are you going to respond?" "No," I said. "Forgiveness doesn't require conversation." He nodded slowly, understanding something important. Not long after, Rowan told me he'd started seeing someone. His tone was cautious, respectful, as if afraid to disrupt the balance we'd found. "She's kind," he said. "Patient. She asks questions." "That's a good sign," I replied. When he eventually brought her home, the difference was immediate. She introduced herself warmly, asked about the house, about our family, about my garden. She listened when I spoke, not as an obligation, but with genuine interest. "I'd love to learn how you make that stew Rowan talks about," she said shyly. I smiled, surprised by how easily warmth returned to my chest. Later, when they left, Rowan lingered at the door. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not closing yourself off after everything," he said. "You could've." I thought about that long after he went to bed. Time continued its steady work. The sharp edges of the past dulled. The house filled with routine again. Meals, laughter, quiet evenings. Rowan moved out eventually, not in escape, but in readiness. He visited often, not out of guilt, but connection. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden watching the flowers sway, I understood something essential. I hadn't won a battle. I'd reclaimed authorship. That knowledge carried no bitterness, only peace. The last stage of healing arrived quietly, without ceremony. It came not with a dramatic realization, but with the steady rhythm of ordinary days that no longer felt heavy. Mornings became something I looked forward to instead of bracing myself against. I woke without that familiar knot in my chest, without rehearsing conversations in my head before I even stepped out of bed. Peace, I learned, is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply stays. Rowan moved into his own place in early spring, a modest apartment not far from my house. He didn't rush the decision. He waited until it felt like a choice rather than an escape. The day he carried the last box to his car, he hugged me tightly, the way he had when he was young and afraid of thunderstorms. "I'll still be here all the time," he said. "I know," I replied. And for once, I didn't fear that closeness would cost me myself. We settled into a new rhythm. Weekly dinners became a tradition again, but this time they were relaxed, free of tension and performance. We talked openly about mistakes, about fears, about the ways love can go wrong when people confuse possession with care. Rowan no longer avoided difficult conversations. He leaned into them, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes painfully, but always honestly. Watching him grow into that kind of man gave me a quiet pride deeper than anything I'd felt before. Not because he was successful or impressive, but because he was learning accountability. He no longer needed to be the hero or the victim. He was simply human, and that was enough. The woman he was seeing became a steady presence in his life. She didn't try to replace anyone or rewrite history. She asked thoughtful questions, respected boundaries, and never treated my past as competition. When she spoke to me, it was with a gentleness that felt natural, not rehearsed. I noticed how Rowan relaxed around her, how his voice softened without shrinking. One evening, as we washed dishes together after dinner, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for raising him the way you did." The words caught me off guard. Gratitude had rarely been expressed so plainly in my life. I smiled and told her the truth. I did my best. The rest was his choice. That distinction mattered to me now. I no longer measured my worth by how much I gave or how much I endured. I had learned, finally, that love does not require self-erasure. Months passed, then a year. The legal chapter faded into memory, no longer a wound, just a scar that reminded me I'd survived something significant. The properties continued to provide steady income. I hired a manager to handle what I once did alone, allowing myself more time for things I'd postponed for decades. I joined a small book group. I took longer walks. I learned to sit with myself without guilt. Occasionally, someone would bring up Celeste's name, cautiously, as if it might still hurt. It didn't. Not anymore. I felt no urge to correct narratives or defend myself. The truth had settled where it belonged. I didn't need to chase it. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the living room, sunlight slanting through the windows, and realized how different the space felt. The air was lighter. The furniture felt like it belonged again. Even the walls seemed warmer, as if they'd been relieved of the tension they'd absorbed for years. I understood then that homes remember how they're treated, just like people do. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. Not lists. Not records. Just thoughts. I wrote about fear, how it had shaped my decisions, both wisely and foolishly. I wrote about love, how it can blind and strengthen in equal measure. And I wrote about dignity, the thing I'd nearly lost because I believed kindness meant endurance. The final entry surprised me most. It was a promise, written clearly and without hesitation. I will never again give someone access to my life without respect. That promise felt stronger than any legal victory. On my 65th birthday, Rowan surprised me with a small gathering. Nothing extravagant. Just people who mattered. Neighbors who'd stood up for me. Friends who knew my history. Laughter filled the house, real and unguarded. As I watched them talk and move through my space, I felt a deep, grounded contentment. Rowan raised a glass and cleared his throat. "I want to say something," he began, and the room quieted. He looked at me, eyes steady. For most of my life, I thought strength looked like confidence, control, and certainty. I was wrong. Strength looks like resilience. Like integrity. Like someone who refuses to disappear, even when it would be easier. My throat tightened. "My mother taught me that," he continued. "Not by words, but by example. And I almost forgot it. But she reminded me, not by fighting dirty, not by cruelty, but by standing firm. I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for that lesson." I didn't cry then. I didn't need to. The moment was complete as it was. Later that night, after everyone left and the house returned to its quiet state, I sat alone in my favorite chair. The same chair where I'd once cried in silence, believing I was being pushed out of my own life. The difference now was unmistakable. I wasn't waiting for the next blow. I wasn't preparing to endure. I was simply resting. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's that dignity is not something others grant you. It's something you choose to protect. You don't need to shout. You don't need to destroy it. You only need to stop accepting what diminishes you. They thought I would fade quietly into the background. They thought my kindness was weakness, my patience a flaw. They were wrong. I didn't seek revenge. I chose self-respect. And in doing so, I didn't just save my home, my legacy, or my future. I reclaimed myself. That, in the end, was the victory that mattered most.